President Zelensky of Ukraine came back. This time he was wearing a suit. Mondays with Mike.
Mondays with Mike. Mondays with Mike.
President Zelensky of Ukraine came back to the United States recently. This time he was wearing a suit. There was a disagreement, by some recountings, a shouting match between him and Trump. Perhaps some dared hope that we were past this, but apparently not, and now there are some missiles delayed. Do you want to fill in our viewers on more than that in terms of the facts of the case?
It's just more of the same, it looks like. There's this back and forth. It's actually really strange, right? Because Trump keeps going back and forth between we're going to sanction Russia, we're going to give Ukraine more weapons, we're going to be more aggressive, and then this temporary retreat almost of maybe not as much, maybe not the weapons. And it's this strange vacillation, actually, between having a serious commitment and having a quasi commitment. We don't see what's going on behind the scenes for any of the diplomatic overtures that are going on. We see that the end result of diplomacy. So there was a meeting that was supposed to happen that between Putin and Trump that apparently isn't happening anymore. So the question becomes, why wouldn't that meeting be happening? And the only obvious answers to me are that they have a disagreement about something, and that disagreement's being publicly aired instead of behind closed doors. The disagreement was behind closed doors, but when the meeting is canceled, that's where you see that public disagreement being aired. There's what we see and then what we don't see, and what we don't see I think is still ongoing, right? Because the war is a discussion between countries. It's one country wants something and the other country says no. And right now, Ukraine is still saying no. And Russia ultimately is either going to keep fighting until it gets what it wants, or Ukraine prevails. It's not so clear that Ukraine's going to prevail because Russia is a bigger country with more resources, more people. At least on paper, Ukraine needs the help and support of other bigger, powerful countries just to keep fighting. Where does Ukraine get the resources? From NATO or Europe, right? Europe's invested in this conflict staying in Ukraine between Russia and Ukraine and not spilling over into the rest of Europe. This is why this is so odd for what's going on. There are signs, if you know where to look, of Russia pushing the limits outside of the conflict with Ukraine. So there was that submarine that surfaced that was a little weird. There's all those drones that keep flying into Poland, and the Polish government is saying stop doing that. There's all these little things that are happening, sending a sign that Trump is playing a very delicate game right now of containment. They're trying to contain the conflict between Ukraine and Russia. That's why you see stuff like this. I know it looks like they're arguing and they're fighting, but the end goal is ultimately like, what's the balance between the weapons that the U.S. allows Ukraine to have and the damage ultimately that those weapons would cause to the greater, broader picture of the balance of power, the balance of power between the major powers of the world. There's a great book about this, The Tragedy of Great Power Conflict. It's something I learned in college too. If you really want to understand like the strange rationale going on, read the Melian dialogue between Athens and the tiny country of Melos, where Athens invades Melos, a tiny little country in the middle of the ocean, for no apparent reason, takes all their resources, enslaves all their people, and Melos goes, "Why are you doing this?" And Athens goes, "Eventually, we're going to fight you, so we're just going to do that now."
Was that the one that didn't contribute to the Dalian League, who we're not going to give you money for the Dalian League? Was that the same one?
I'm not sure, but the point is that when countries get big enough, they view almost everything and everyone as a threat. You're either with the program or you get steamrolled. So the Mongol Empire actually is a good example of this, of what they did, is they would show up and say, trade with us or else, right? So look up the Khwarezm Empire, where Genghis Khan sends a bunch of envoys to the Emperor of Khwarezm and says, we want to open up trade. We'll give you stuff. You give us stuff. That's great. Emperor of Khwarazm kills the envoy, sends back decapitated head. Genghis Khan's like, not on my watch. Sends his whole entire army and wipes the Khwarazm Empire off the map. Goodbye, no more Khwarazm Empire, right? Russia was a very big coalition of countries. And so they're trying to regrasp some of the territory that they lost because they still have power, but their place in the world is diminished. Post the fall of the Berlin Wall and the collapse of the Soviet Union, if you look at the spheres of power, right now the US is still the strongest. China's one of the strongest economically. Russia it has been struggling, which is part of the reason I think that this war is even happening, was to seize the grain-rich Ukraine and more access to more ports. That was Crimea. We're going backwards as a human society. It's because the whole point of the creation of the UN was to stop aggression. It was to limit the things that led to World War One and World War Two, which was countries trying to snatch other countries. This whole back and forth between Trump and Ukraine, and we're going to give them weapons. We're not going to give them weapons. We're going to help them. We're not going to help them. We're going to give them money. We're not going to give them money. It's this delicate balance, right? They're trying to just contain it. They want Ukraine fighting, but they don't want them fighting too hard. It can't be a total victory because Russia has nukes. And if Russia feels their back is against the wall, that there is no like off ramp, no exit, nukes. And we don't want that. No one wants. There's no one in the world that I can see is like, yeah, let's. That's why. Do you remember when India and Pakistan had very briefly just like a whole lot of fighting? They sent fighter jets against each other and blew up a bunch of planes, and they fought, and then all of a sudden, nope, no more fighting.
You mean in the 60s or recently?
It was pretty recently. In the grand scheme of things between countries, that's not happening anymore. I wonder why. Because a lot of the other countries of the world said, hey, you're big countries with big economies, and we will use whatever levers of power we have to make this stop. Don't do this. You both have nukes. Don't fight. To the degree that you're fighting is bad. This is one of those things where we see the end, we the people, right? We see the end result of a lot of behind the scenes diplomacy. Because if you're talking, technically, right, that shows that there's still diplomacy going on. It's when the talking stops that a different kind of diplomacy is happening. Honestly, I've been looking at this situation down in South America and the Caribbean and now the Pacific. I've been wondering what on earth is going on for why all these strikes keep happening. And I think it has something to do that with, at least in part, with Russia trying to get a foothold in South America. It's an end run around sanctions. That's what I don't know, right? I'm looking at this situation. It's like, why are they heavily invested in this fight? And there's got to be something going on more than just like the superficial part of it. Because remember, there's two markets in the world. There's the public market, the market we see, and then there's the gray market, the sort of black market, underground market. Some countries are infamous for this. Italy's infamous for having an underground economy. Russia is infamous for having a underground economy. If you look at the value of their currency and their economy, it's not great. And there's a lot of sanctions that are on Russia. I think I know this sounds a little strange, but it looks, at least to me, like there's something going on more than just the fight that they're publicly stating, that it's a way to try and curtail some of the money flows. But we won't know, and we don't know. We're not going to know because that's all very behind the scenes, like secret stuff that no one gets to know. There's the war we see, and there's the war we don't see. And the war we don't see is always going on, right, between countries, but we're not seeing it because that's by design, right? We're not seeing it. But it's always there. We know it's there because we see the impacts of it every so often.
Intel and whatnot, yeah. Covert ops.
Yeah, so that's where I'm really wondering what's going on because this $40 billion bailout for Argentina seemed completely out of left field. I was thinking about it. China and Russia have a security agreement similar to NATO where they have a mutual defense kind of pan East Asia thing where they say we're neighbors and so we help each other, and China still interacts with Russia regularly. But I think it goes along the lines of containment that you want a stable Argentina so you don't have other countries swooping in to destabilize it, essentially. This is what's so strange about the Trump administration is that they do occasionally do moves that seem dumb, but the end result is that it's still leading to a level of stability that you otherwise don't have. That's what's so complicated about the situation is because Venezuela has, I think it's the world's largest amount of crude oil in the ground. It's always the glittering jewel, right? The prize of these huge countries that in order to operate need just extraordinary amounts of oil. It just makes me wonder if there's something else going on that we just don't know about. But anyways, it was a very long deviation, a very long tangent. I
You know
think
what I'm
in
going to
the end,
say.
the U.S. will help Ukraine with money and weapons, but it's a delicate balance of making sure that the weapons aren't too strong and that the money isn't all the money. It can't be a victory so great that Ukraine wins against Russia. Essentially, a victory, at least my understanding of it, would be like a stalemate, that they just push back Russia, get them out, no more fighting.
Yeah, there's a lot to chew on there. It does just seem the recurrence of the same kind of conflict doesn't make sense to me, so probably there are inputs that I do not see.
The tariffs thing of Trump putting tariffs on China is actually a similar kind of thing. It's like, why is this happening again? They're trying to accomplish something, and the something isn't necessarily. I don't think it's always the superficial. Oh, we want more money, so we're just going to slap on a huge tariff. If you listen to Trump talk about the point of tariffs, at least in his mind, it's a way to influence the actions of countries aside from the sort of de rigueur, the let's talk with each other and try to make things happen. It's to get countries to the table. It's to create leverage where there otherwise may not be any leverage at all. And so that's, I think, something similar going on here. But honestly, I don't think they should cave to any demands for territorial accession. Don't give up Crimea. Don't give up any
One
part
of my
of Ukraine.
questions.
Because the problem is it sets an insane precedent that larger countries can just swoop in, do a little war for a while, expend a bunch of resources, lose a lot of troops, and then at the end of it go, okay, I guess I get a third of your country now. The whole point of the UN is to stop stuff like that from happening. This sends us backwards, right? It sends the wrong message completely because it creates a permission structure for countries with more power to subjugate countries with less power. We're going to see, time will tell what the end result of that's going to be, but it doesn't look pretty, right? It gets what he wants in Ukraine of taking any amount of territory. Then he goes, okay, now I know that for this amount of money and this amount of troops, if I invade some of the smaller countries, at some point they'll back down and just let me have half their country, a third of their country.
Future readers of history would know it, and that would be the real poison.
Yeah, all the other countries of the world would know that at some point, if they invade a country and have a long, protracted war, they get at least some of what they want. And the answer to that has to be no, you don't get any of what you want. I think that's part of the issue is that it's a shift of U.S. foreign policy, at least in some respects, that countries get their own little like sphere, their own little backyard playground, their spheres of influence, and within those spheres, they get to decide what happens. And in this case, it looks like Russia gets to decide that it wants Crimea and parts of Ukraine. But that's a really complicated thing because what we haven't seen tested yet is if Article 5 holds. We haven't seen that actually tested yet in any real way. I don't know that it will be. It's a very complicated situation.
You brought up so many good points about it that, and so many different aspects of it that it's like that. I'm like the bishop. It's which diagonal should I move on here? But I think the reason that we keep bringing this into the podcast is because of the current world order. It relies a lot on free trade, yes, or at least trade, at least interdependence, and mutual aid, and the arbitration of international disputes by hopefully impartial third parties, but most of all relies on conflict staying within borders and not going between the borders, and not the sovereign of one country saying, I want that country now. And that's really the whole thing. Kurzgesagt made a great video a few years ago about how it's not a perfect world by any means, but for the average person, there is the hope and the real possibility that technology will improve our lives rather than making our lives worse. But if you start to have great power conflicts as of old, I think that wipes it out. I think that reverses it, and would be just a very terrible thing. Did you say that you thought that Russia was running afoul of the Monroe Doctrine?
Yeah.
In terms of
No, so
Argentina?
look, this has a long and storied history of Russia and Latin America. So remember the Cuban Missile Crisis, where Russia was parking missiles right off the coast of the US in Cuba? That whole situation has never really changed. Russia still has relations with Cuba, diplomatic ties to Cuba and Venezuela and Nicaragua. There's a whole bunch of countries in South America and the Caribbean that Russia still has at least friendly, cordial diplomatic relations with, right? While the rest of the world's like sanctions, bad Russia, don't do this. Those countries aren't really going, bad Russia, don't do this, or publicly making any kind of statement at all. And so the point is that, look, there's the war we see, and there's the war we don't see. And the war we don't see is this like constant back and forth between countries of trying to secure geopolitical power or to change the balance of power in certain areas. Specifically in Russia's case, it's for trade and for trying to circumvent the sort of existing world order, the what you might call the Western world, by finding countries that aren't aligned to the UN and NATO countries, and to find an end run around sanctions, right? To find ways to still fund its endeavors. The point is that if Russia can succeed in creating distraction in South America by helping the Maduro regime, for example, it draws the attention away a little bit from the Ukraine conflict, where the focus and the energy might be more on giving arms and more funding for Ukraine and expending energies on that. Instead, what's going on is all this stuff in the Caribbean and down in South America. Look, there's a really complicated situation going on in the world right now because you've got these cartels and you've got this underground black market economy that's huge, right? It's a gigantic economy, but a lot of it you don't see until you see the effects of it. You see the cartels exercising power down in Mexico, for example, by kidnapping people and doing all sorts of things. But the big question is who is helping to fund these cartels? Who's the buyers of these products? And it's not just the United States. There's also a lot of other groups that we don't know about that also profit tremendously. It's the whole issue with organized crime is that a lot of it is secret, a lot of it is underground, a lot of it's behind the scenes, but we know they're there because they haven't been stopped. Because the flow of drugs still continues, the violence still continues, there's still the ongoing problems. It's not just Russia that has, unfortunately, a history of assisting what might be called regimes that are authoritarian or that don't follow a democratic system of government. The US has a history. You remember the Iran Contra scandal where they were giving guns to I think it was the Nicaraguans in return for money. I think it was they were making money from cocaine that was being sold in the streets of the U.S. to fund clandestine operations. But the whole point is that there may be things going on. This is why the world is so complicated, is that there may be things going on to fund Russia's endeavors that have absolutely nothing to do with the war in Ukraine, but have to do with other stuff that Russia is doing, trying to make money in other ways, right? Or even just trying to ensure that they have a pipeline for oil, right? Or they have access. There's all sorts of things and considerations because Russia's huge, right? It's 10% of the world's land. It's bigger than Pluto. And so to keep control of a country that big, like honestly, you need just a stupid amount of oil and fuel and resources because they have to be able to get their planes to fly from to East Asia, right? Like it's a huge country. They have to, in order to maintain, because of sanctions, right, and because of the issues that they face with participating in the economy due to the war with Ukraine, they have to find alternate sources of fuel from countries that have shown a willingness to just ignore sanctions. Do you think the Maduro regime really gives it any kind of? They don't care. Do you think they care that much about sanctions? Honestly, I don't think they do, and that they're going to try to make money wherever they can. And the thing that Venezuela has that makes it sort of the glittering jewel right now of geopolitics forever is that it has a huge amount of oil, just a colossal amount of oil just sitting underground. And they just need to find someone to get it out of the ground and process it. But anyways,
Yeah. I wrote a paper when I had an international relations class in college, and I remember making the point in the paper that forget energy independence for money, forget energy independence for environmental concern. We really need energy independence so we don't need to muddle around in conflicts in countries with abundant oil. In order to diffuse the petroleum bomb upon international relations. But that's a long time ago. Russia, big country, like you say, bigger than Pluto, I believe it. I'll just take your word for it. I'm not even going to look it up. Russia's bigger than Pluto. Not even a planet. It's like you should rank Pluto below Russia in terms of land area to give the Russians a confidence boost.
But I was exaggerating a little bit. Pluto is 17,646,012 square kilometers, and Russia is 17,125,191 square kilometers. So, mea culpa, Russia is slightly smaller than Pluto.
Okay, big deal. Let's give Pluto to the Russians. That way, it'll be about double the size. Fine with me. Probably Siberia's colder than Pluto anyway. No, it isn't.
But don't look it up.
It's not.
Yeah.
Pluto is
Okay,
a
but, like-
frozen wasteland.
Yeah, but Russia has resources. Russia has rare earths. Russia has petroleum, and we don't want it, or we shouldn't want it, because there's a bunch of Russians that live there, and it's not, you just don't, Russia has a double total protection from invasion. One, nukes, obvious. Number two, they're so big, they can't be invaded successfully. Germany, with an enslaved Europe, couldn't do it. France, with an let's say an infederated Europe, couldn't do it. Nobody can do it.
Nobody can do it.
The Mongols did it. They did it with horses, a lot of horses.
Mongolia could do it. But let's
call them a unique case in world history because they had a very advanced way of fighting that the other countries of the world weren't used to at the time because they were using shock troops and moving much faster than the other countries were adequately prepared for, let's put it that way. The only countries that resisted them were protected by turbulent oceans.
Okay, so the Mongols, prior to the Trans-Siberian Railway, were able to do it. So as long as you keep them happy, what is it, 5 million people?
That was a long time ago, but yeah.
Russia, they've already got resources, and frankly, the way climate change is going, like, they're going to have sea resources as well. They keep their airspace. Don't let foreign planes just in and out of their airspace. Commercial airliners, one of the only countries not to do it. Okay, fine, Russia, fine. But the non-invasion of other countries is really central to the world order and protects them as well, like it protects everybody. If you had a peaceful Russia and Poland got some ideas, but it was a peaceful Russia, that wouldn't, I'm not going to say that they repartition it. I'm going to edit that one out. But it doesn't matter who it is. Like, nobody. That's what the international order relies on. So, we've said a fair amount of that. And the last thing I was going to ask, but you already answered it, is are there going to be territorial concessions from Ukraine because of Donbass? Apparently, Trump says maybe they have to give up Donbass. He might have said it, he might not anyway.
But sources said he did.
If I had to guess, it looks like Russia's going to hold on to Crimea. They have it, and they're not giving it up. The way things are going, it looks like Russia may hold on to some territory that it seized from Ukraine if Ukraine wants the war to end. But if Ukraine keeps going, who knows? But the problem right now is that at some point, Ukraine runs out of one of three things. They run out of weapons, they run out of ammunition, or they run out of people, right?
Yeah.
And if they run out of people to fight, they lose. If they run out of ammunition, they lose. If they run out of sufficient weapons, because the weapons get destroyed, or they fall apart, or they break, they lose. Russia, because it is so big and has more of those things, weapons, ammunition, people, it can do the same that it did in World War II. It can just keep throwing people at Ukraine until Ukraine runs out of people, and Russia does not run out of people. Absent foreign intervention on Ukraine's behalf of what you were talking about, something like the Gulf War, like a coalition of 40 some odd countries to stop Russia from snatching up Ukraine. Right now, the situation is that they're at a standstill, right? Ukraine can keep fighting because it has the weapons and the ammunition and the people. But the meeting was about the fact that on at least one of those, they're running out of the weapons that they need and maybe the ammunition that they need. And so that's why they need help from the US and Europe. That's how I see it. They wouldn't be asking for help unless they needed the help, right? Because the war's been going on for so long that whatever stockpile they had of weapons and ammo and people to fight, right, is running out. People get injured. Soldiers die. That's war. That's what happens in war, right? At some point, Ukraine will run out of one of those three things, and then they're stuck. They will lose. They'll get steamrolled by Russia, and then Russia will just get whatever they want, absent some stronger power saying no. That's where we're at.
It's bleak, but we keep on keeping on. To conclude, my thoughts on it is that they have held out for longer, much longer, than I would have thought. So, I guess don't count them out until, I don't know, until something really dire.
Ultimately, it's a war of attrition, right? That's the sad fact about it. The numbers are not in Ukraine's favor. They're still losing because Russia still holds territory. Russia's, I don't think, going to give up the territory if it has, unless it has to. And so, how this is going to resolve, ultimately, to give Russia some face saving out, maybe like a token amount of land or territory. I don't think they should get it. I think the war should be resolved with something similar to the Korean Wars, some kind of like DNC and a coalition of countries put peacekeepers there, right? That you just maintain a safe border and you deter further Russian aggression. You just keep soldiers there to stop Russia from invading again. Ultimately, the world has to decide if they're going to allow aggression to continue, because if they get the land and they get away with it, then other countries will go, if we want more land and resources and stuff, war may be the cheaper option than buying it, because it's expensive to buy things from people when you can just go in with less expensive things like guns and bombs and soldiers and just take it. And so that, I think, is the bigger picture of what this conflict is, aside from the fact of whether Ukraine stays a country or not. I think at the end of it, Ukraine will stay a country. It'll just be a smaller country. The problem is that this war ends, but what's to stop the next war? A weakened Ukraine is weak to other aggressors. And so that's a whole separate situation of why this needs to be resolved in a way that all the powers can see a way forward that doesn't involve World War III. Because if this is the sort of like opening pitch or whatever of World War III, this just makes Russia stronger if they get to keep the territory from Ukraine. If they get to keep all the rich, fertile regions and the farmland and the ports.
Okay, the dismal situation remains. Mondays with Mike.